You cannot draft these 5 players at their current ADP, starting with Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey is the ultimate high upside, low floor pick in the early rounds of 2025 drafts. We know the ceiling. The last time we got a healthy Christian McCaffrey, he was RB2 in fantasy points per game in 2022 and the RB1 in 2023. He combined for 152 receptions over those 2 seasons with more than 3,900 total yards and 34 touchdowns. However, a lot has changed since then. He's now 29 years old and coming off a multi-injury season that held him to just 4 games in 2024. He missed the early portion of the season with Achilles tendonitis in both legs. Not only that, when he did play, Christian McCaffrey is not the same guy. He averaged just 12 fantasy points per game. That was a career low. He was inefficient, not explosive, and then he got injured again in week 13 with a PCL injury that cost him the rest of the year. Now, Kyle Shanahan has declared Christian McCaffrey 100% healthy, but he remains one of the biggest risks in fantasy football this year at his ADP, which is currently sitting in the first round. Now, we've acknowledged the upside. It's there, no doubt about that. But the first 4-5 rounds of fantasy drafts, especially in round 1, are not for taking home run swings. You want to draft for upside in the second half of drafts? Be my guest. I encourage it. But you should be drafting for floor with those early picks. You could absolutely tank your season by whiffing on a guy that early. You don't win your leagues in the early rounds, but you sure as hell can lose it. That's why I refuse to take a guy with such an unstable floor as Christian McCaffrey has this year. Let me know how it went if you drafted him 101 last year. And of course, anyone can get injured. I understand that. But Christian McCaffrey is particularly vulnerable given his injury history, his career workload, and his age. Like I said before, he's 29. He's had more than 1,800 career touches, and he's played less than 8 games in 3 of the last 5 seasons. Eventually, these injuries are going to stack up to the point where he's just not the same player he used to be. And who's to say the 49ers aren't going to put a cap on his workload in an effort to keep him healthy for a full season and get him to the playoffs? Plain and simple, there's a real chance we never see the 2022-2023 version of Christian McCaffrey ever again. And because of all that risk, you absolutely cannot draft him at his ADP. I would rather draft guys like Ashton Genty, Brian Thomas Jr., Nico Collins, or Derrick Henry. Now, flipping over to the wide receiver position, we have a rookie, Travis Hunter. He is such a unique player. The Jaguars said after the draft that while he will play on both sides of the football, Hunter will focus primarily on offense. That's great news. However, his ADP in seasonal leagues has steamed up way too much. It just doesn't make sense to draft him where he's going. He's not the number 1 wide receiver in his own offense. Brian Thomas Jr. is the alpha wide receiver in Jacksonville. And this isn't a T. Higgins situation where he's the number 2 in a Joe Burrow offense. This is still Trevor Lawrence that we're talking about. Let's look at it this way. Travis Hunter is a really good wide receiver prospect. There's no denying that. I comped him to Garrett Wilson during the pre-draft process. He's so smooth, athletic, and his ball skills are absolutely incredible. But he's a rookie. He's going to be behind Brian Thomas Jr. in opportunities. He has a league average quarterback at best. And not only is he a rookie, but he's a rookie who's going to play both sides of the football, something we've never seen in the modern NFL. What does primarily on offense really look like? Because I've seen some highlights of him practicing on the defensive side, and he's looked quite impressive. They're going to want to play him over there. Are we talking 60% of the snaps on offense, 70%? He's not going to play a full slate of snaps on offense and be playing on defense, especially not as a rookie. It's not going to happen. I mean, it's already tough enough to learn the NFL game, learn the NFL playbook, NFL work ethic, practice routine, NFL speed, never mind having to juggle also learning a defensive playbook, getting practice reps in on defense, defensive meetings, defensive film. There's just so much that goes into it. It just seems impossible to expect this guy to come in and be this high-level producer in year 1. And what really is his ceiling? As long as Brian Thomas Jr. is in the picture, Travis Hunter's ceiling is going to be capped. He's not going to be some league-winning wide receiver in this environment. It can't happen. Travis Hunter, plain and simple, he is all sex appeal. His ability to play at such a high level on both sides of the football is overinflating his value as a fantasy wide receiver. That plus his NFL draft capital, which, let's be honest, he would not have been the number 2 overall pick if he was just a wide receiver. He was boosted up by the ability to play both ways. Does he have sex appeal? Absolutely. He's got it like crazy. But is he a logical pick at ADP? Absolutely not. I would rather draft guys like Devontae Smith, DJ Moore, George Pickens, Calvin Ridley, Cortland Sutton, or even like a Jaden Daniels or Jalen Hurts if you're looking for a quarterback at that point in the draft. My next fades in 2025 fantasy football are a combination. They're teammates, Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Let's start with Godwin. Godwin was on pace for a career year last season before his injury. But unfortunately, the dislocated ankle cut his season short and has created questions about whether he's even going to be 100% to start 2025. Now, the good news is the Bucs were comfortable enough to re-sign him to a multi-year extension, even if it was at a little bit of a discounted rate. But Godwin remains a risky pick coming off a serious injury at 29 years old, and he feels like an old 29. And on top of that, the Bucs just used a first-round pick on Emeka Egbuka, who has a very Chris Godwin-like skill set. My concern is not only will Emeka Egbuka eat into Chris Godwin's target share, but he will eat into his slot role. Egbuka profiles as a primary slot guy. So if he comes in and bumps Chris Godwin back out to Z, to me, that's very concerning. Godwin just moved back into the slot last year, and we saw the impact that that had on his production. So it would be really unfortunate to see him moved out of that position again. We also have to factor in the late season breakout of last year's rookie Jalen McMillan. We've got Cade Otton in that offense, plus the 2 running backs who are both excellent pass catchers. Never mind Mike Evans. That's a lot of guys to get the football to. It's going to be hard for Chris Godwin to command the same volume that he was getting in the early parts of last season, even if he is at 100%. Now, going over to Mike Evans, obviously we know 11 straight 1,000-yard seasons. He's 31 years old, though. And wide receivers of Mike Evans' archetype tend to fall off the cliff pretty quickly. And looking back at 2024, he did get that 1,000 yards, but he barely got that 1,000 yards. He only reached it when the team force-fed the ball to him in a kneel-down situation in the final game of the season. He also posted a career-low of 13.6 yards per reception in 2024, which ranked 34th among all wide receivers. His average target depth was down to 11.6, which is barely inside the top 40. Is he losing his explosiveness? I don't know. But looking at the Tampa Bay offense as a whole, that offense really peaked in 2024. It's hard to see a repeat of some of the passing numbers despite the full complement of weapons being back healthy for that offense. I mean, Baker Mayfield completely outplayed himself. He threw 41 touchdowns. His previous career high was 28. He threw over 4,500 passing yards. His previous career high was barely over 4,000. And his 71.4% completion rate, which his previous career high was 64.3%. Now, I agree that he got better. He can definitely get better at this point in his career, but he's about 30 years old. I don't know if he got that much better the same way that these numbers reflected he did. I think he'll have another good season, and the Bucs will certainly have an above-average offense, but those numbers are going to be impossible to replicate, especially the touchdowns in particular. So for Godwin, I would rather draft guys like George Pickens, Chris Olave, Calvin Ridley, Cortland Sutton. And for Mike Evans, I would rather draft Ted McMillan, Terry McLaurin, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and any of the early quarterbacks that are going around his ADP. And going a little bit deeper down the board, let's talk about Marvin Mims. Some people are pegging Marvin Mims as a third-year breakout candidate. That's in reaction to his strong finish to the 2024 season, where he averaged 62 receiving yards per game from week 11 through the end of the season. And in that same stretch, he also led all wide receivers in yards per route, according to Fantasy Pros. And Marvin Mims was certainly used when he was on the field, as evidenced by his 28% targets per route rate, which ranked top 15 among all NFL wide receivers. That's all encouraging on the surface, but Marvin Mims' role is completely unstable. While some of the peripherals do look nice, I'll give you that, he was actually in a very gadgety role. He was deployed a ton in the screen game. He lined up in the backfield, as well as using him to stretch the field vertically. However, he wasn't running many big boy routes. In fact, according to Josh Norris on Twitter, Marvin Mims caught just 11 passes beyond the line of scrimmage in 2024. 29 of his 41 receptions came on screen passes. The gadget stuff is fun, and he did well with it. But how often do we see gadget guys become reliable fantasy assets? Almost never. And the Broncos aren't going to need to be so gadgety this year. They upgraded the running back room. They signed a target hog tight end in Evan Ingram in free agency. And they drafted wide receiver Pat Bryant in the 3rd round of this year's draft. Not to mention, Courtland Sutton is the established alpha in that offense, and quarterback Bo Nix has a tendency to scramble, which only takes pass attempts out of the offense. Marvin Mims will be a fun player for Sean Payton to do some different stuff with, but that's not going to translate into a ton of fantasy production or a breakout season. He's certainly not worth his 10th round ADP. I'd rather draft guys like Drake May, Hollywood Brown, David Njoku, Jaden Blue, Kyle Williams. All these guys are going at a similar price as Marvin Mims. I'd take those guys easily over Marvin Mims. But let me know in the comments, who are you avoiding in drafts this season? And if you agree or disagree with my list. And don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We'll be pumping out content like this all summer long.